So, special guest today, talking about some of our binaural stuff and monitoring, taking our multi-channel monitoring binaural considerations. So David, as you know, he finished up his MFA last summer and has been working up in New York City for a audio post-production house called Goldcrest, and they do tons of HBO, Netflix, all kind of high-end streaming stuff. He's a mix tech up there. What a mix tech does, if we think about what a traditional studio engineer audio assistant for a studio gig would be, they'd be setting up the console, they'd be maybe running Pro Tools, they'd know all the gear inside and out. So take that and put that into an audio post-production perspective. We have dealing with incorporating in his scenarios, Dolby Atmos, the renderer, dealing with all those isolated stems that we saw, those of you unfamiliar with audio post, we saw the dialogue, music effects beds on top of everything, understanding that, having fluency on the S6 control surface, because that is the control surface of choice. So understanding all of that under the hood stuff, dealing with deliverables to distribution, whoever's distributing it, whether it's Netflix, HBO, making sure all that stuff is good, dealing with quality control notes that come back, QC notes that come back and say this was too loud, this was this, or this was that. So understanding all of that under the hood and being fluent with that technology allows you to sit there and also interact with those that are at the more creative side, the mixers, and you learn and you advise them on the technology because you're versed in it. And David spent a lot of time. I posted his final paper. Those of you in the grad program should definitely give that a look just to check out how it is. But I posted that to D2L yesterday. You should definitely check that out. But yeah, David's up here. He's kind of visiting good old Nashville and was kind enough to stop by and do a little discussion for us, considering that we're dealing with this immersive stuff. So I'll let David take over. Clap, 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 clap.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. So today I just wanted to come and talk a little bit about the binaural component, of Dolby Atmos and really in general immersive audio technologies, because obviously we know that there are multiple immersive audio technologies that are doing, speaker playback, but also headphone playback. It's not only Dolby Atmos, right? We have, Sony 360, we have Elisa from L Acoustics and DTSX, for example. And they're all doing kind of the same thing and going after the same thing of bringing immersive sound, for both music content and as well post-production content. But Dolby Atmos happens to be at the moment kind of, at least in the marketplace at the top. So that's why obviously, we also have to take a good look at it and see what's going on with it. So today's I'm just gonna talk a little bit about some of the important considerations that I believe we must have when mixing immersive content. So one of the things that I wanted to consider is that obviously immersive audio content right now has been growing, right, as we all know, in recent years. And now we have technologies such as Dolby Atmos that are putting immersive content out there in streaming services like Apple Music, like Tidal, and Amazon, and they're using these novel delivery codecs, right, to provide binaural audio delivery to headphones, in order to do this immersive 3D spatial experience over headphones. See how I did, for example, put immersive 3D and spatial audio all together type of there, kind of just to give an idea that those terms in today's A&H are still kind of used interchangeably to refer kind of to the same thing. I don't think that we have come to a consensus yet to exactly how to define, immersive 3D or spatial audio. So one of my presentation goals is to discuss briefly the principles of binaural audio, right? Kind of have understanding of what's going on in general. Also discuss the delivery codecs that are being used to deliver Dolby Atmos content to the masses, and then also showcase this tool that I personally use to go in between a virtual speaker environment all while still using headphones in a binaural environment called Virtuoso. So just a quick overlook of binaural audio, right? First of all, I do really believe that we must have like a deep of understanding of binaural for doing immersive audio content. And human hearing, our human hearing is binaural, right? Like meaning we hear with 2 ears, right? And with only 2 ears, we are capable of listening to sounds all around us. How do we do this? Like we use localization cues, such as in interaural time differences, interaural level differences, as well as the effect of our head, torso, and pinna that has over the sounds we hear. All of those physical, physiological effects over sound are what we know as the head-related transfer function, so HRTF. So those 3 localization cues, or those 3 elements, interaural, time differences, level differences, and the HRTF all together, make possible human sound source localization. And so, a quick example is, for example, if we imagine that my hand here, my fist, is a sound source, right? And I say, close my eyes, and without seeing, I'm trying to localize that sound. So if my hand starts emitting sound, that sound is gonna get earlier to my right ear than it gets to my left ear, right? Like that's the first, time difference, cue. Then also, most likely as well, depending on what the frequency of that sound is as well, or the frequency, content of that sound is, most likely level-wise, right? The level is gonna be greater, in my right ear than it is in my left ear, right? And so that's the interaural level differences, being into account. Then we have obviously the HRTF, the effects of that sound has when interacting with, the physiognomy of my body, like with the shape of my ears, with my head, with my torso. So that's the 3rd element. So the brain knows how to decode all that information, right? So the brain has the capability to decode that information in the sounds that we hear, and therefore is able to localize that sound is in there, right? So in binaural audio signals, right, are created by superimposing these cues, right, into sounds, either naturally, like for example, a dummy head binaural recording, right? That's what it's doing. It's simply superimposing these cues into the sounds we hear because it has the shape of a human, head and torso and everything. Or it can also, binaural signals can also be generated artificially to what we know as binaural synthesis, which is, for example, what, the Dolby binaural engine, when you listen to the Dolby binaural output out of the render, is doing, right? That's doing, binaural synthesis. Again, just superimposing all these localization cues into, the sounds that you drop into the render in the form of objects or beds, right? And so immersive audio technologies such as Dolby Atmos utilize these binaural synthesis to kind of like recreate, this human localization, sound source localization experience. As we know, proper reproduction of binaural content requires that each of the 2 signals, because it's a 2-channel format, is delivered individually, discretely, to each of our ears without any crosstalk in between the channels. That's why the best medium in order to deliver binaural content is headphones, right? Because each of the 2 signals is being delivered discretely into each of our ears. It can also be done on speakers if they have what is known as crosstalk cancellation, mechanism algorithms, so you can actually make binaural work over speakers, but you need to have these crosstalk cancellation, algorithms that pretty much reduce or minimize the crosstalk that you get, in between, speakers when listening, to speakers. So once that we explore this, I kind of like just wanted to listen to this, right? All that I say, about the general, theory about binaural audio, it's all cool and great, but obviously it all makes sense when we just listen to it. So I'm gonna try to play some binaural examples. The first two binaural examples that we have is Neumann KU100 dummy head recordings. That's, like I was saying, localization cues being superimposed naturally through the use of the dummy head. And then we're gonna listen to a binaural synthesis example, right? Which is the one at the bottom of this commercial that Sennheiser was doing with their Ambio technology. They are like advertising a lot of of their speakers and sound bars and this and that and all that, but at the end of the day, all you're listening to is like binaural being synthesized in their commercial. So let's give that a try.
Used to spend my nights out in a bar room. And liquor was the only love I know. But then you rescued me from reaching for the bottle. Brought me back from being too far gone. You're as smooth as Tennessee whiskey. You're as sweet as strawberry. You're as warm as a glass of brandy. Honey, I stay stoned on your love all the time.
Sennheiser shapes the next generation of audio experiences by enabling listeners to hear and control the world around them. We call these experiences Sennheiser Ambio. Stereo sound uses 2 channels to provide spatial information. Surround uses up to 7 channels and allows you to hear sound from more directions. But that still doesn't sound real. Sennheiser Ambio is fully immersive sound and removes the limitations of channels altogether. No longer coming from only left or right, front or back, sound sources like voices, instruments, and their echoes can be positioned anywhere in 3D space, creating new sonic realities and enveloping you from all around. The Ambio experience can be provided by an immersive speaker setup like the Ambio soundbar. In cars with Ambio mobility, and even with regular headphones. With AR headphones, Ambio uses virtual and ambient sonic information to provide spatial awareness and is therefore a key component in convincing augmented realities. So you can hear and almost feel someone walking around you and suddenly whispering from behind. From the moment a sound is recorded, through mixing and processing, all the way to the final listening experience, Sennheiser delivers an end-to-end solution that enables professionals to create new sonic realities and give every media production a lasting impact.
How are those examples, right? It's kind of like good to kind of like hear what's going on, compare, for example, the dummy head recording, right? How did that sound spatially? How does that put around you spatially? And then how the binaural synthesis work. In the Dolby render, for example, they're using a Neumann KU100 dummy head as their main profile, HRTF profile, and running, convoluting, and filtering all the audio signals in the render through that. So that's what you're listening to when you're listening to the binaural output of the render is signals that are being convoluted with a Neumann KU100 dummy head. So getting, used to how those things sound then allows you to start making sense, right, of what your binaural environment is, because there's a learning curve to your ear and to your brain. Remember, the brain is really here, the main character. He's doing the heavy lifting. So your brain has to, starts making sense of what he's listening to. So kind of like knowing, like, okay, this is a Neumann, dummy head. Knowing things like, terms of, we're gonna speak soon about the binaural render modes and how that is like switching in between different, room acoustic simulations. Then all suddenly, your brain starts making more sense of things, and then binaural, starts becoming more familiar. So now going into the delivery codecs for binaural, right, being used to deliver Dolby Atmos content to the masses, right? Creating an Atmos mix requires good translation in both a speaker environment like this, but also a headphones binaural environment. And a fact is that the vast majority of consumers will listen to Atmos mix in headphones, not in a speaker environment like this. So that's something to have in mind, when you're trying to think about what your end goal is going to be for your mix. So understanding how your binaural Atmos mix is being delivered to consumers is totally critical. The current Dolby Atmos distribution pipeline, intended for binaural and headphone, uses two different delivery codecs. Those two different codecs are the AC4 IMS, as known as Dolby Binaural, and the DD plus JOC, Joint Object Coding codec, known popularly as Apple's Spatial Audio Binaural. These two different flavors of binaural sound very different from each other, and we're gonna listen to a little bit of comparisons to put this into perspective too. And also, what has been happening is like these codecs and the way how they're like delivering binaural, to the masses, are being constantly updated and tweaked and hopefully improved. So with each, for example, of your iOS, updates. So an Atmos mix that you did 5 years ago doesn't sound the same anymore on Apple Music as it will sound today, because that Apple spatial binaural has been tweaked a lot ever since. So very problematic, right? But again, things to think about and to kind of like try to work around or find workarounds for that situation. So the AC4 IMS, Dolby's binaural, is used to deliver binaural content for headphones in Tidal and Amazon Music. Some experts speculate that this is going to be the codec that Spotify is going to use when they jump into the Atmos bandwagon. That's a speculation, though. We don't know. But if Spotify does that, that's huge, because as we all know, Spotify has some of the also vast majority of listeners that any streaming service may have. It has more than Apple Music and Tidal and all of that. So whatever Spotify chooses, then it's going to be a very important factor. Dolby's binaural is created by running each of the bed and object signals through the HRTF, algorithm of the Dolby renderer. So each object, each signal is binauralized individually. This is huge because that's going to be the main difference in between Dolby's binaural and Apple's binaural. Dolby's binaural is what you listen to when you output the Dolby binaural output out of the renderer. It makes use of the Dolby Atmos binaural render modes, right? Near, mid, and far. Some of you probably have already seen these in the renderer. And it was the codec that Dolby originally intended to be used as the main binaural distribution codec. But then Apple joined the game, right? And Apple said, nah, this is like, Dolby, you do you, we do us, right? And they chose this other codec called DD plus JOC, or JOC, as their main codec for their whole spatial audio infrastructure. So it's not only what they use to give you music, but if you listen to Atmos, Atmos content in HBO, Netflix, everything that is like spatially oriented, in any Apple device, this is what you're listening to, Apple's binaural. So it's being used to deliver binaural headphone content in Apple Music, which as of right now has the most extensive catalog and listening body of Dolby Atmos music. Is created, this is the main difference in between the Dolby binaural, is created from a 714 re-render of your whole Atmos mix. So when you send your master, your ADM Atmos master to Apple, right, for them to deliver in their streaming service, what they do is that they grab that ADM and they do a 714 re-render of your whole entire mix, and then they play that through a 714 virtualized speaker setup, right, over headphones and binaural. So that's what's happening. And that's why they sound so different. Apple's binaural completely discards the binaural render modes. The near, mid, and far that you so much, and spend so much work tweaking in the render, that's gone. It's not there. So again, and that's a huge part of the specific Dolby binaural versus the Apple's binaural, right? So again, it's being reproduced over this virtualized 714 speaker setup. So what does that look like? That actually looks like and sounds like very alike the Virtuoso software, the Virtuoso application, from the Applied Psychoacoustics Laboratory in the University of Huddersfield. It is directed by a good friend of mine, Professor Dr. Hyunkuk Lee. He is directing that great research place. They just currently hosted the AES International Immersive and Spatial Audio Conference. So what I'm trying to say with that is like, they know a lot about spatial and immersive audio, and they have put all that research body, into this plugin pretty much. If I want to exemplify better what I was talking about in regards what Apple does, this is what they do, right? They grab your 714 re-render and play it through their, Apple spatial audio engine that it's basically this, a virtualized 714 speaker setup that has a binaural output. So very different sound, very different vibe. So in other words, you're mixing for 3 scenarios that may be very different scenarios. You're mixing for real speakers, you're mixing for Apple's binaural, you're mixing for Dolby's binaural. So, right, a little bit of a moving target, what to do, right? We'll get there in a minute, but right now I just wanted to talk a little bit more about Virtuoso. So Virtuoso is a binaural translator, that's what they call it, right? It's a tool that we utilize to have that feel and that vibe of mixing with real speakers while still in a headphone environment, right? So one of the main things that this facilitates is that we can have way better translation in our headphone mixes that we do with tools like binaural when we then bring that mix into a speaker room, right? So translation should be very close. I mean, that's the whole point of it. Like you start with Dolby Atmos mix at home, using binaural. Say, you get it to a good place, it's a rough mix, pre-mix, you use binaural the whole time. When you bring it, when you have your precious time, studio time, either here or in the post-lab, that mix should already be there. Should be at least 80 or 90% there. That translation should be good. And then, of course, there are some tweaks that you're going to be doing because obviously it's not going to be 100% perfect in terms of translation, but it's definitely going to be way closer than if you only did, for example, the Dolby binaural, you only use Dolby binaural to mix because, again, Dolby binaural, when you bring it to a speaker environment, which I highly encourage you to do that, right? Just experiment with it, right? Like start your mix, in headphones only, using the Dolby binaural output out of the render. Do it, make the greatest mix ever, and then bring it to the speaker environment and check it out, see how it translates and see, what's sounding different, and you start realizing that at some point, you're gonna start doing, you're gonna have to start doing some sonic averaging, right? It's what some masters engineers call it, to average your mix, to be able to translate well to these 3 main environments, playback environments. This is my workflow, with Virtuoso. When I'm mixing with Pro Tools, I have Pro Tools as my source. Then I send that into the render using the Dolby Audio Bridge. Then from the render, I get the 714 outputs, of my render and send it into Virtuoso, right? And Virtuoso makes the speaker set of virtualization for me, and then I listen to everything on the headphones. If I am at home these days, everything goes through Virtuoso pretty much. I listen into everything over Virtuoso. And so again, trying to train my ear and my brain to understand that binaural environment so that I can, use it better, like learn it in order to be able to, better know how it'll translate to different other places, etc. Also, I find it just overall better and more accurate because I don't have right now a treated room at home, right? So if I put 2 speakers over there, my room is very gnarly sounding. So I would rather be, in cans, in a more treated, space that I learn and that I know very well than, in an acoustical space with speakers that is non-ideal, right?
What are you using as your driver out of Dolby, out of the renderer into Virtuoso?
Out of the render in the Virtuoso, I use this virtual 16-channel driver called Black Hole. So that's what I use. I set my Dolby render output to be in the 16-channel, the Black Hole, and then in Virtuoso, in the settings, you will see that that is my input, right? So my input will be the Black Hole 16-channel, and usually my output is the external headphones, but right now we're using the external HDMI, which is great. All right, so we already talked, right, about this dilemma, right? Like, hey, your Atmos must sound great, in 3 different spaces. The 2 binaural sound completely different. Great. Now, Like there are things that we can do about it, right? Obviously, workarounds and all that stuff that we engineers do. So for starters, I would say, like I was saying before, definitely start with the tools that you have at hand right now, right? Like, what do you have at hand? You have, you know, a laptop, pair of headphones, maybe the renderer. You can start mixing right away using the Dolby's binaural. Start there, you know, and, you know, get very used with the tools and the panners and all of that and the signal routing. You don't need to be on a speaker setup to be learning all of that. You can start today with your laptop and a pair of headphones. And then whenever you have the chance to come to the speakers room, like, check how that translation is, right? So you're already getting, you know, your mix being sonic averaged in between these two environments. But obviously, later on, you also got to account for the Apple Spatial and see how your mix is translated to Apple Spatial, right? Now, one of the good things about a good speaker mix and a good, you know, and well-calibrated speaker room is that it actually translates very well or, you know, decently to Apple Spatial, because Apple Spatial, remember, is trying to emulate, you know, a real speaker room. So if you do a good speakers mix, you know, either in a real speaker room or with a virtual speaker room that comes even closer to Apple's spatial virtual room, then your translation is also going to be closer than if you said just did your mix only using the Dolby binaural, because that, again, it's not going to translate too well to Apple's binaural. And like you will find out when you do your comparisons, bring your Dolby binaural mix and then play it on speakers, and you're going to find things that you're going to have to go back and address. So that for me is the solution, right? I usually, the speaker mix for me is still very important. I consider it to be like the Atmos master, like the ultimate Atmos master, from which all the other, you know, like re-renders or deliverables are going to be taken from, are from that, you know, 714 speaker mix. That is like the main, you know, it's like the root of the tree, right? And from there, you know, everything else gets extrapolated and extracted. Another thing, good thing about the speaker mix is that it's what it is, you know, when you listen to speakers, and that is not being changed. Like your ADM master, speaker master, is not being changed like these other binaural codecs are. So, you know, that remains, you know, as it is, faithful. And so if later on, you know, like whatever, there's an update or something changes in the binaural, you can always come and re-export from your original speaker mix that stays the same. So for me, you know, again, I usually, you know, start, you know, my mix in speakers, real speakers or virtualized speakers like Virtuoso. That's where I usually start. And then usually I'm also like checking the Dolby binaural in real time in here. And in the post lab, we're going to have the ability to have the Dolby binaural output, you know, live, so that you can, you know, when you're mixing in a speaker, just put your headphones, check your binaural, make sure it's not, you know, sounding crazy, and then come back and continue mixing on speakers. And in doing that, again, you do like a great sonic average and ensure that your mix is gonna translate well to all these three different environments. So yeah, like as a summary, you know, before we go to Q&A, just wanted to again talk about, you know, how important, you know, understanding, you know, this binaural, how binaural is being created and delivered to consumers is, because at the end of the day, you know, that's what, you know, most of your listeners are gonna listen to also absolutely, you know, it's very important. And also now with the tools that we have available to us, you know, like Virtuoso, and knowing, you know, right, like at the end of the day, you know, your consumers, your listeners are gonna be listening to your headphone mix anyways. I am like, I don't think that really perhaps not having access to a 714 speaker setup 24/7 should be really keeping anybody, you know, from starting mixing and experimenting with Atmos, right? Because now we have these tools, and also at the end of the day, like this is where people are gonna hear your mix, right here. So, thank you so much.
All right.
And with that, I'll take any questions you guys may have. Yeah.
Do you think the Dolby Atmos renderer will ever switch to like a binaural re-render that's similar to the Apple Music or the Virtuoso, or do you think they're gonna stay more of the way they're doing it?
Right. I don't think they're gonna switch it just because, again, the Dolby, infrastructure is already, very well established as well, and it goes, 10 plus year, back in the day of like when it started out with post-production. Music came, like way later. So that's a reason. And then the other reason is like they're using that, binaural engine to, deliver their mixes for Tidal and Amazon Music. So they're already using that. So, and again, like I was saying, initially that was the codec that they intended, for distribution. So no, I don't think they will do that. But perhaps one of the things I've heard also some rumors about they may be incorporating, for example, the Apple Spatial Audio Engine or something similar to it, so that you can switch inside the renderer in between the two binaural flavors. That may become an option in the near future.
Do you prefer the sound of Dolby's binaural over Apple's binaural, or is it just figuring out how to work between both?
To be honest with you, I prefer actually Dolby's binaural. Yeah, it's just because the way how you can like tweak it, with the binaural render modes, near, mid, far, you have a lot of control, and you can test it for yourself. Also, if you go and listen to the same mix in Tidal, for example, that is using Dolby binaural versus Apple, the same mix over Apple Spatial, and compare them. I personally prefer the Dolby binaural that I hear in Tidal. Sounds better to me. Yeah.
So you were explaining earlier how like any streaming service you use, like on an Apple product, it'll use their codec, right? So even if you have like Tidal on your phone, it won't switch to the Dolby Atmos
Tidal does
for
it.
the app, or
Yeah, Tidal does switch it. Yeah,
Okay.
when you have Tidal on your iPhone, definitely you're getting the Dolby binaural. Yeah, it overrides that Apple
And
Spatial.
I had one more question too. So when you're routing like Apple Music through your computer and you're like doing a Dolby Atmos mix into the Virtuoso, is it not like playing Apple's codec render through into Virtuoso and like doing two renders, or is it just like exporting the stems from Apple Music into
Exactly.
Virtuoso?
Yeah, the later on. Yeah, it's not doing two steps of binauralization they're referring. No, it's just grabbing the dry, 12 channel output, each of the 12 channels and 714 re-render, and sending those, into each of the virtualized speakers in Virtuoso.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else?
How do you tackle, it seems like with Virtuoso you had the output up like +6 or whatever, and it seems like a lot of these emulation softwares have some sort of like they have to pump the gain down to do whatever they need to do. How do you tackle that when you're trying to like hit a loudness target at the end of your mix?
Loudness targets. That's great. Well, right now, my what is it called? Gain structure was not set, quite properly because of the change we did. So there were some signals coming out of Apple Music that were perhaps hotter than I usually send it to, and I was even seeing that the output at some point, was, clipping a bit. So that usually is not the case when I have, all my gain staging right in my, Virtuoso workflow. But in terms of loudness, yes, loudness is a great topic, very important topic. I am gonna say something about it, but I also gonna give you a resource for that to go into more, details into that. Professor Justin Gray, who did this YouTube video on mastering Dolby Atmos music with Justin Gray, approaches to immersive object-based audio mastering. He goes into a lot of detail on all of this. It's definitely way more, advanced than what I just touched in here. And I fully recommend it to anybody that wants to expand more on their knowledge for that. That video is amazing. It's a 4-hour video. It's a 4-hour video that I fully watched before this presentation. So,
David is that
because
dedicated.
I knew okay, I want to see where we are right now, with the state of the art of the technology. So I met Professor, Justin Gray last year in New York at the AES New York. He gave the same talk, but he only had 1 hour to give it at AES, so he couldn't even like go past his, I don't know, 3 or 4 first slides. This guy goes deep, but in terms of loudness, he explains, for example, we all know that, for example, Dolby Atmos mix is supposed to have a loudness of minus 18 LUFS, right? But that is a recommendation. That is not really the last or even the most important factor because of what's going on with how they normalize, loudness in the Apple spatial engine when it comes to, normalizing in between stereo mixes and Atmos mixes, because it used to be that stereo mixes were like way louder than Atmos mixes, and Atmos mixes were way quieter, and people were, comparing it like that. Obviously, apples to oranges, as we all know, how important it is to match loudness when doing comparisons. So, that's a normalization, and loudness is something that in that case, for example, it's actually the true peak value, the value that is the most important, which is like that -1, true peak value, and where you leave that so that you can account for the normalization that Apple does to your mix when, for example, someone enables sound check, in your in an iOS device, which is what is used to normalize those two things. So again, loudness is a huge topic in Atmos. We just probably don't have the time to go all, but for those who really want to get to know all of it, I definitely recommend Professor Justin Gray video. I also recommend these other sources, Immersive Sound by Professor Agnieszka Rodzinska and Paul Jaluso from NYU, Professor Foglia alma mater, and then the 3D audio book by Hyunkok Lee, by Dr. Hyunkok Lee. I pretty much like those were like the 3 main works that I consulted and cited for coming in and give this presentation.
Now, relative just gain structure, if that's what you're concerned about, like the Virtuoso isn't adding anything to your loudness level. Remember, you're going right out of Pro Tools through the Dolby Audio Bridge into the Dolby Atmos renderer, which then gives you the loudness level that you're working at. So that is, after that, you can crank the thing up, distort the hell out of it, or turn it all the way down. It's not going to affect that input.
Yeah.
The Virtuoso is just a monitor box. So doing some gain structuring there, it's not doing anything. I don't know if whenever you bypass, if it jumps or it auto switches relative to that, but it's not affecting your loudness level as far as the mechanisms reading it are.
Right.
So.
And also the reason why I have it, for example, at 6 dB plus 6 dB on my main monitoring switch is because when I bypass it, it actually maintains the same loudness to the just a regular stereo signal versus the loudness of the emulation itself. When it's at 0 and you bypass, the stereo is way louder. So with this, I am kind of like myself trying to match also those volumes so that I can do comparisons, with the same perceived loudness at least.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for like tackling the loudness of objects in Atmos? Because I could be wrong, but objects don't get metering, right?
Yes, there's no object bus per se where you can, send all your objects and, control loudness there. So you gotta do it individually per each of your objects. Just make sure, you have a limiter, in each of your objects. That's what a lot of people do in both music and post-production, and make sure that each of your object, is not going over, that desired loudness that you want to, or level that you would like to use.
Cool. But again, that is gain stage dependent though, so you wouldn't be able to remember, in Pro Tools, outside of master tracks, inserts are pre-fader. And so if you did clip gain adjustments, well then a limiter as an insert would work. Mm-hmm. But if you're riding the volume and you're going above 0, then a limiter is not going to do anything as far as referencing stuff. So the thing with loudness, it's an interesting concept, and obviously we can have a 4-hour talk on it. But if you establish if you think of what your focal point is, and this is the sound for picture approach, our focal point is typically dialogue. If you're doing instrumental, it's whatever your lead instrument is. If it's voice, something with vocals, it's your vocal, and things are relative around that. So if that is generally in the target zone, then you're mixing other elements relative to that. So in theory, you should be quasi in the ballpark with things, not to be too far up. Yes, there's additive stuff that goes together, but it's not like you're going to miss and have something that's going to be 6 LUFS louder than something else. It might be momentarily, but it's not going to be over the duration to really skew up your integrated LUFS level. So good questions, though.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Something I've tried to do in the past is like take a wave file, a Dolby Atmos wave file, and like play it back so I can use like my AirPods for like head tracking. But I know like I have Apple Music and it won't let me like import those files into my library and play them back. So do you know how you could play back one of those files and then use AirPods for head tracking?
One of the, say for example, you're out of the render, how to output that out of the render?
Or I'm just like after you've bounced the wave file and then you just want to play it back?
Yeah, so one of the ways you can do that is you can do a .mp4 export out of the renderer, and that actually gives you the Apple spatial audio codec and binaural presentation, and then you can bring to your iPhone and listen to Apple spatial pretty much in that way.
That's part of I think that's in the lesson 6 of the learning lab stuff that you guys will be doing. You'll be exporting an MP4 as one of those exercises, so you can kind of see that process as you go there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not a real-time check like using the binaural renderer in Dolby where you kind of flip back and forth.
Right.
But it is a way for you to do, from memory, some comparative analysis. What did that sound like through the renderer? Oh, okay, here's what it's doing here. So.
Yeah. A real-time check will be if you have Logic Pro X, for example, that Logic now has, built in that Apple spatial engine pretty much into Logic. When you're mixing Atmos in Logic, then you can use that to, if you send, say, like your 714 re-render, you create that and then bring it to Logic and output it, in the spatial engine over there, then you can listen to it. That I guess in that case it wouldn't be live, but a lot of people that do, so they have a dedicated computer just with Logic, but they're sending, their 714 re-render to have that there and to monitor in real time, what's going on in the Apple spatial. This is very smart, but again, it's,
Are they able to toggle between the Dolby's binaural and what the Apple is within the application? Because it has a built-in. I haven't used Logic in that capacity.
I guess that in that case they have the Apple binaural in their main system. No, sorry, the Dolby binaural in the main system, where they have everything else, and then just separately, I guess they just switch on headphones or something like that, really just to listen to what's going on, in the Apple spatial. I know a lot of music mixers that do that.
Part of the problem solving in audio, right? Or it's always about problem solving, like we were doing at the beginning of class here.
Right. Yeah, no, great question. Anybody else? Yeah.
Can you import speaker configuration or presets into Virtuoso?
Oh yeah, there's a bunch of them.
Do people share? Has someone created something that sounds like Apple Music to kind of figure out what it would sound when it gets
get that
there?
profile into
Yeah,
Virtuoso?
so it's more instant instead of having to bounce something.
That would be great. I've been thinking about talking to Dr. Lee about that and maybe do some sort of emulation in Virtuoso that sounds close to what that would be. They don't have it as of right now, but it's a definitely great idea to implement in the future. So yeah, great idea. It's not available right now, unfortunately, but great. Yeah.
So do you feel like Dolby Atmos has a really strong future? Because clearly we've tried to do multi-channel quite a few times in the past. And I'm just curious what your opinion is on the future of all of this.
Yeah.
Do you think we'll keep going in the progressive direction, or do you think?
Most definitely is my answer. I think that immersive, audio technologies like Dolby Atmos are here to stay. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. It's actually just growing in terms of, production capabilities and also mediums and facilities and playback devices for people to listen to this content, at home, consumer devices. Like for example, in the Ambio demonstration that I did, they show how they, can do Ambio immersive content in sound bars, headphones, even in cars. I got the other day a really cool experience, listening to Atmos in a electric car, Lucid Air, that has a 24 speaker built-in Atmos setup into it. Mind blowing. So, again, when you start experiencing more, this content in these different environments, you see what they bring, to the table and the value of it. And that, it's absolutely in my opinion, a way superior experience that it would be to listen in just in real conventional stereo.
I've noticed just listening to Dolby Atmos mixes and stuff, there's not necessarily a standard way of mixing in immersive, and everyone has their own best practices, it seems.
Yeah.
Do you think that will emerge at some point? There will be a set way to do it, or do you think it's just gonna kind of be this limbo? Because I know, like you were saying earlier, some people just use LR and don't put much in center, or some people mix, especially in Atmos remixes, some people mix for the perspective of the person sitting in the seat instead of the center channel and then things going around. Instead, it's all in your head. I don't know. Do you think there will be a best practice that emerges, or?
I think that there will be best practices. I think that we are already seeing that. There are some practices at this point that already have been established, right? Don't put your drum set, in the ceiling, because percussive, elements don't translate, in terms of elevation too well, and that kind of stuff. Don't put your bass, up in the ceiling and stuff like that. So we are looking already at best practices coming up. But again, specifically, the way how each person mixes, like anything else, I can find one or stereo. I believe there are going to be different flavors and different approaches on how to do it. And it's all good, as long as your approach is creative and sounds great. Nobody is going to really, care too much, But yeah, that's a good question, though. Yeah. Any other question?
Great stuff, David. Appreciate all the insight and the demonstrations there.
Absolutely. Thank you. So your class goes until 12:40, right? Okay.
Oh, perfect. Look at that.
Okay. Matt, do you still wanted me to give that?
Is that something you can do in 5 minutes, or is it a little tight?
Yeah, I think I could show that real
All
quick.
right. So real quick, we're gonna have David just show some. So with this, you want to do it on yours?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So with the version of Pro Tools of 2023.6, which we have in here, they added the ability, instead of having just 712 being their widest bus, they have a 714. Prior to that, you would have to kind of rig around reverb returns. And so Dave was just going to show how the reverb returns. Now, normally, with the reverb returns, you put your top channels, the 4.4, you break those into objects. So you have that separation up front and rear. If you have something in the .2 in the bed, it feeds out of, if you have 4 speakers, feeds evenly like a left and right. There's been discussions with and kind of comments about whenever you have reverbs and they fold down, reverbs in the beds that fold down, they can get a little washy because they're often put in the rears. And so sometimes that's undesirable. If you have them as objects and you're spacing them front and rear, well, then that gets distributed a little more in that location into the fold downs. So David was just going to show how that automatically, if you're having a reverb return, a 714 reverb return, how to automatically populate based on what you're looking for here. So.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna talk through to my own process so that you guys, kind of have a better idea, right?
There we go.
Exactly. So I start obviously in the renderer, just making sure that my, input configuration, for example, is right in the renderer. I'm just gonna use the default input configuration right now, and then in Pro Tools, what I'm gonna do with my I/O is that I'm gonna create it off of the renderer's default input configuration, right? Start your I/O from Fresh, just to make sure that everything is routed correctly. A quick way to do it is if you go to your bus, to your buses tab, right to the right of this default bus button, you can switch in between where to gather that I/O configuration from. And if you use Dolby Atmos Render Stereo, it's gonna automatically create all of that for you. So now you already have all your I/O configuration, buses, outputs, and everything ready to, route your signals into the render. So with that, I'm also gonna create a 714 Atmos bus here in Pro Tools. How I'm gonna do that is that I'm gonna use the track presets, Dolby Atmos track presets, to select a 714 bus. That is gonna be like my main mixing bus for if we're mixing in here. So I create that from the preset real quick. There we go. So it automatically, creates your bus, and everything is automatically routed. Also, if you look to the renderer, you're gonna see that the 4 objects assignments have already been done for you to send, signals discretely to each of your 4 height speakers. So I already have my bus. So I'm gonna create now, like if you were creating a stereo, aux track for a reverb, same thing, but now it's gonna be a 704, aux track for a 704 reverb. Pretty cool stuff. I love the new bus widths, that Pro Tools has implemented. 712 never ringed with me, never worked out with me. So when I saw this, nobody was talking about the new bus widths. That was the only thing I care about, about the new updates. So 704, like aux track, I create that as an aux input, and this is gonna be my verb. Right?
And verbs are, you don't send any verb to the LFE, just as an aside. So that's why there's 0 in the middle.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm gonna use my cinematic rooms, plugin that already has a 704, configuration availability. You have to have the latest update, by the way, of the cinematic rooms verb in order to do this. But once
Pretty sure we have that in post as well as here.
Yeah. Once you put it in there, boom, it goes in there. So I'm gonna send it to my 714 bus, right? So now I'm routing the output of my verb to be going into my 714 bus. And then obviously I'm gonna have to create a bus to be able to route my 704 reverb, right? So create that 704 verb. That's gonna be the input to my reverb right here. So if I were to have a audio track, which for now we're gonna use the handy dandy signal generation. Gotta solo that beautiful 714 bus. I'm gonna send it there. So we see it there going into a 714 bus. We see it in the renderer coming right into the center discrete channel. And if I want to send that into my verb, I can do that too, and put some signal in there. And now we can see how all the verb is coming through the 714 environment.
It auto split the .2 into the 4 objects, which is awesome.
Yeah.
The older version, you use these sub paths through the reverb, like these auxiliary effect sends, which is cool and is a workaround. This is cooler and easier.
Yeah.
So, all right. Any quick questions on that? Yeah.
So is that track preset that you use, does everyone have that in Pro Tools, or do you have to go download that from somewhere?
Gotta have the latest
2023.6.
Yeah.
And it'll be in there?
And it's part of your template kind of thing, so
Okay.
preset things.
2023.6 or newer. I don't know if we have any newer yet. Probably not, right?
I think it's still 2020.
Yeah, 6 is the most
2023.6?
recent. I'm hearing rumors of an 11
Right.
coming in.
Which they were, yeah.
So.
Okay, but yeah. So pretty much, yeah, that's how you do it.